Now, what do we do? What do we do to rebuild the middle class? What do we do to create the millions of decent paying jobs that we need? Let me just very briefly describe some of the major initiatives that I intend to fight for in the new Congress. And there are 12 major initiatives which, if enacted, will transform the middle class of this country. Number one, we need a major investment to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure, our roads, bridges, water systems, wastewater plants, airports, railroads, schools, etc. It has been estimated that the cost of the Bush-Cheney war in Iraq, a war we should never have gotten into in the first place, will end up costing us some $3 trillion. If we invested $1 trillion in rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure, we could create 13 million decent-paying jobs and make this country more efficient and more productive. We need to invest in infrastructure, not in war. Everybody in America understands that our infrastructure is collapsing. No great secret. According to the American Society of Civil Engineers, nearly 1/4 of the nation's 600,000 bridges are structurally deficient or functionally obsolete, and more than 30% have exceeded their design life. What that means is that all over this country, bridges are being shut down because they're dangerous, and they need repair. Almost 1/3 of America's roads are in poor or mediocre condition, and 42% of major urban highways are congested. As we speak, in cities all over America, people are backed up in traffic jams, burning fuel, wasting time, because we don't have a proper infrastructure. The American Society of Civil Engineers says we must invest $1.7 trillion by 2020, 5 years, just to get our nation's roads, bridges, and transit to a state of good repair. So what happens when we invest in infrastructure? What happens when you do that? Well, I'll tell you what happens. $1 trillion in infrastructure investment not only makes our country more productive and efficient, but it also creates a substantial number of decent-paying jobs. A $1 trillion investment would maintain and create 13 million decent-paying jobs. The fastest way to create good-paying jobs is to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure, and in my view, that should be a very, very high priority for this Congress. 2, the United States must lead the world in reversing climate change and making certain that this planet is habitable for our children and grandchildren. We must transform our energy system away from fossil fuels and into energy efficiency and sustainable energies. And when we do that, make our transportation system energy efficient, make our homes more energy efficient, move to wind, solar, geothermal, biomass, we can also create a significant number of good-paying jobs. When they look back on this period and they look at an issue like the Keystone Pipeline, what they will be saying is, what were you people thinking about? How could you go forward in terms of increasing the exploration and production of some of the dirtiest oil on this planet when virtually all of the scientists were telling us that we have to substantially reduce carbon emissions? Reduce carbon emissions, not increase carbon emissions. So in my view, an important mission of this Congress is to listen to science, listen to the scientific community. And they are telling us loudly and clearly, Climate change is real. Climate change is caused by human activity. Climate change is already causing devastating problems in America and around the world in terms of drought, in terms of flooding, in terms of extreme weather disturbances, and we have got to transform our energy system away from fossil fuel into energy efficiency, into weatherization, into wind, into solar, into geothermal, and into other sustainable energies. And by the way, when we do that, we not only lead the world in reversing climate change, but we also create a significant number of jobs. 3, we need to develop new economic models to increase job creation and productivity. Instead of giving huge tax breaks to corporations which ship our jobs to China and other low-wage countries, we need to provide assistance to workers who want to purchase their own businesses by establishing worker-owned cooperatives. Study after study shows that when workers have an ownership stake in the businesses in which they work, productivity goes up, absenteeism goes down, and employees are much more satisfied with their jobs. 4, union workers who are able to collectively bargain for higher wages and benefits earn substantially more than non-union workers. Today, corporate opposition to union organizing makes it extremely difficult for workers to join a union. We need legislation which makes it clear that when a majority of workers sign cards in support of a union, they can form that union. I want to say a few words about family values. Family values is an expression that has been used for many years by my Republican colleagues. Let me take the opportunity to briefly give a somewhat different perspective on family values, on real family values, on the values that really matter to millions of families in this country. When a mother gives birth to a baby and is unable to spend time with that newborn child during the first weeks and months of that baby's life because she does not have the money to stay home and is forced to go back to work, which is the case for millions of mothers in this country, that is not a family value. Separating a mother from a newborn baby for economic reasons is not a family value. In fact, that is an attack on everything that a family is supposed to stand for. When a wife is diagnosed with cancer and her husband cannot get time off of work to take care of her because he does not have any family or medical leave time or any sick leave time, that is not a family value. That is an attack on everything that a family is supposed to stand for. When a husband, wife, and kids during the course of an entire year are unable to spend any time on a vacation, when they can't get together in leisure activity, when they can't relax and spend quality time with each other, that is not a family value. Let us be very clear in understanding that, in fact, in terms of protecting the needs of our families, in terms of real family values, in many, many respects, the United States of America lags behind virtually every other major country on earth. When you look at other major countries, what you find is that the United States is the only advanced economy that does not guarantee its workers some form of paid family leave, some form of paid sick time, some form of paid vacation time. In other words, when it comes to basic workplace protections and family benefits, Workers in every other major industrialized country in the world get a better deal than our workers here in the United States. That is wrong, that is a travesty, and that has got to change. Last place is no place for America. It is time for us to join the rest of the industrialized world by showing the people of this country that we are not just a nation that talks about family values, but that we are a nation that is prepared to live up to these ideals by making sure that workers in this country have access to paid family leave, paid sick time, and paid vacations, just like workers in virtually every other major country on earth. Simply stated, it is unacceptable that millions of women in this country give birth and are forced back to work because they don't have the income to stay home with their newborn babies. What is, when we talk about family values, more important for mothers and fathers to bond with their babies at a time when almost every psychologist will tell you that those are the most important weeks and months of a human being's life? What kind of family value is it when you tell a woman who has just had a baby that she cannot spend time with her child, but she has got to go back to work? This is not a family value. That is an insult to every mother, every father, and every newborn child in this country, and we have got to change that. The reality is that the Family and Medical Leave Act that was signed into law in 1993 is totally inadequate. Today, nearly 8 out of 10 workers in this country who are eligible to take time off under this law cannot do so because they cannot afford to do so, according to the Department of Labor. Even worse, 40% of American workers are not even eligible to receive this unpaid leave because they work for a company with fewer than 50 employees. In my view, every worker in this country should be guaranteed at least 12 weeks of paid family and medical leave, and that is why I am a proud co-sponsor of the Family Act introduced by Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. The Family Act would guarantee employees 12 weeks of paid family and medical leave to take care of a baby, to help a family member who is diagnosed with cancer or has some other serious medical condition, or to take care of themselves if they become seriously ill. And just like Social Security, retirement, and disability, it is an insurance program that workers would pay into at a price of about 1 cup of coffee a week. But that's not all. We have got to make certain that in this country, workers have paid sick time. It is absurd that low-wage workers in McDonald's, Burger King's, and low-wage employees all over this country who get sick are forced to work because they cannot afford to take time off. Not only is this unfair to the workers, it is also a public health issue. I don't know about you, but I am not crazy about the idea of somebody who is sick coming to work, preparing the food that I eat in a restaurant. And that is why I am supporting the Healthy Families Act, introduced by Senator Patty Murray, which guarantees 7 days of paid sick leave to American workers. This bill would benefit 43 million Americans who today do not have access to paid sick leave, and it would create a permanent flaw in workplaces where employers already provide some paid sick leave. When we talk about the disappearing American middle class, we are talking about millions of American workers working longer hours for lower wages. We are talking about Americans who are overworked, underpaid, and in many cases living under enormous stress. In my state of Vermont, I see it every week I'm home. You talk to people who are working not one job, they're working two jobs, sometimes three jobs, in order to cobble together some income and some health care. And here's an amazing irony. Many of us can remember in school reading about workers protesting, taking to the streets 100 years ago, and they held up large banners. And you know what those banners said 100 years ago? They said, "We want a 40-hour work week." A 40-hour work week is the demand 100 years ago. And today, we still have not achieved that goal. In fact, today, 85% of men who are working and 66% of working women are working more than 40 hours a week. In fact, in America today, not widely known but true, our people are working the longest hours of any major country on earth. Because as real wages go down, people have got to work 50 hours, they've got to work 60 hours. Husbands are working here, wives are working there, all together to cobble together some income in order to provide for the family. Today, Americans are working 137 hours a year more than workers in Japan, and the Japanese are very hard workers. We are working 260 hours more than the British, and almost 500 hours a year more than French workers. And that is why I am introducing legislation today to require employers to provide at least 10 days of paid vacation to workers in this country. This is already done in almost every other major country on earth, and it is one more way to demonstrate our commitment to real family values. So what we are saying is that if families are overworked, if husbands and wives don't even have the time to spend together with their kids, what family values are about is that at least for 2 weeks a year, people can come together under a relaxed environment and enjoy the families. That is a family value that I want to see happen in this country. The time is long overdue for us to start talking about real family values. Not about abortion, not about gay rights, but the values that the American people want to see inscribed in law to protect their families. Let us make sure that every American worker is entitled to paid family and medical leave, paid sick time, and guaranteed at least some vacation time. Those are real family values. Let's go forward and make that happen. 5, the current federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour is a starvation wage. We need to raise the minimum wage to a living wage. No one in this country who works 40 hours a week should live in poverty. I have to say, and I think many Americans don't know it, it is not just that virtually all Republicans in the Congress are opposed to raising the minimum wage. The truth of the matter is that many of them want to abolish the concept of the minimum wage. Interestingly enough, in some of the most conservative states in America, voters voted to raise the minimum wage because they understand that a minimum wage of $7.25 an hour here in Washington, D.C., federal minimum wage, is literally a starvation wage. No family, no individual can live on $7.25 an hour. And I want to applaud all of those fast food workers all over this country, people who work for McDonald's and Burger King, for having the courage to go out on the streets and say we have got to raise the minimum wage. I applaud their courage in doing that. And I applaud all of the states, the many states around this country, including the state of Vermont, that have raised the minimum wage. In my view, if you work 40 hours a week, you should not be living in poverty. And I would hope that one of the major priorities in this Congress is to raise the minimum wage to a living wage. And I would, over a period of years, raise that minimum wage to $15 an hour. 6, women workers today earn 78% of what their male counterparts make. We need pay equity in this country, equal pay for equal work. In America today, women who do the same work as men earn 78 cents on the dollar compared to male workers. And I think we have got to address this discrimination, and we need to move forward with pay equity for women workers. 7, when we talk about the decline of the American middle class and the fact that millions of workers are working longer hours for low wages, when we talk about the fact that in the last 14 or so years, this country has lost 60,000 factories and millions of good-paying manufacturing jobs, when we put that issue on the table, we begin the discussion, which is long, long overdue, about our trade policies. That's what we have to talk about. And the truth of the matter is, from Republican leadership in the White House, the Democratic leadership in the White House, there has been support for a number of trade policies which, when you look at the cold facts, have failed. NAFTA has failed. CAFTA has failed. Permanent normal trade relations with China, PNTR, has failed. And over the years, last 30 years, you had Republican presidents, Democratic presidents, continuing to push unfettered free trade agreements, which say to an American worker, guess what? You're now going to be competing against somebody in China who makes $1.50 an hour. And if you don't like it, we're going to move our plant to China. And many companies have done exactly that. Do we think that that is fair? Do we think that's right? I don't. And right now, we're going to be coming up with the Trans-Pacific Trade Agreement, TPP. Let me, without going into great detail at this point, tell you I have very, very, very serious problems with that agreement, both in terms of the process. No member of this Congress has been able to walk into the office where these documents, highly complicated legal documents, are held, bring staff in there, copy the information. We're not allowed to do that. But we're supposed to vote on a fast-track agreement to give the president the authority to negotiate that agreement. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So I would hope that we use the TPP as an opportunity to rethink our trade agreements. Trade is a good thing, but American workers should not suffer from unfettered free trade. Trade should be used to benefit the middle class and working families of this country, and not just the multinational corporations. We need to end the race to the bottom and to develop trade policies which protect the interests of American workers and not just multinational corporations. American companies should start investing in this country and not simply in China and other low-wage countries. Since 2001, we have lost more than 60,000 factories in this country and more than 4.9 million decent-paying manufacturing jobs. We once led the world in terms of our manufacturing capability, yet in state after state, we have seen significant losses in manufacturing jobs, and when people walk into a store, it is harder and harder for them to purchase products made in the United States of America. Point number 8, in today's highly competitive global economy, millions of Americans are unable to afford the higher education they need in order to get good-paying jobs. 40, 50 years ago, we had a situation in this country where some of the great public universities of our nation, University of California, City University of New York, state colleges all over America were virtually tuition-free, and anybody could go to those schools, regardless of the income of their families. Today, for many, many families and young people, the cost of higher education is simply unaffordable. And either students choose not to go to college because they can't afford it, or they come out of school deeply in debt, a debt fastened on their shoulders for decades. Quality education in America, from childcare to higher education, must be affordable for all. Without a high-quality and affordable educational system, we will be unable to compete globally in the international economy, and our standard of living will continue to decline. We have got to invest in education. The idea that we are laying off teachers is completely absurd. We live in a highly competitive global economy. Everybody understands that. And I think we also understand that our young people are not going to do well, and our economy does not do well unless our people have the education that they need to effectively compete in this global economy. It saddens me to note that a number of years ago, the United States of America led the world in terms of the percentage of our people who had college degrees. We were number 1. Today, we are number 12. We are number 12. And the reason for that is that the cost of college has soared at the same time as the income of many middle-class and working-class people has declined. And we are in a position now where hundreds of thousands of young people thinking about their future look at the cost of college, look at the kinds of debt they would incur when they leave college, and they're saying, you know what, I don't want to go to college. I'm not going to go to college. I'm not going to get post-high school education. That is a very bad thing for this country. It is a bad thing for our economy. And we should put on the agenda, I hope high up on this agenda, the issue of how in America all of our people, regardless of the income of their families, can get the education they need without going deeply in debt. This issue of college indebtedness is a horror. I remember a few months ago talking to a young woman in Burlington, Vermont, who left medical school $300,000 in debt. Her crime was that she wanted to become a doctor and work with low-income people. Well, she shouldn't be punished for that with a debt of $300,000. And other people are graduating college, $50,000 in debt, graduate school. We have attorneys in my office who have a debt of over $100,000. We can do better than that as a nation. Point number 9, the function of banking, the banking system, is to facilitate the flow of capital into the productive and job-creating economy. That's what banking is supposed to be. People save, people put money in banks, that money goes out into the economy so the people can buy homes, create businesses. Financial institutions cannot be an island unto themselves, standing as huge profit centers outside of the real productive economy. In other words, banking must be a means to an end, improving society, creating jobs, providing people with decent housing, not simply a means by which financial institutions make more and more profit. 6 huge Wall Street financial institutions have assets equivalent to 61% of our gross domestic product, close to $10 trillion in 6 financial institutions. These institutions underwrite more than half the mortgages in this country and more than 2/3 of the credit cards. The greed, recklessness, and illegal behavior of major Wall Street firms plunged this country into the worst financial crisis since the 1930s. And every day we open up our newspapers and we see another major banking scandal. These financial institutions on Wall Street are too powerful to be reformed. They have too much money, they have too much wealth, they have too many lobbyists, they make too much in campaign contributions. Our goal must be to break them up. They have too much power, too much wealth. They must be broken up so that our financial institutions begin to serve the needs of the American people and not simply the CEOs and the stockholders of Wall Street firms. Number 10, the United States must join the rest of the industrialized world and recognize that health care is a right of all and not a privilege. I think many Americans don't know that we are the only major country on earth that does not guarantee health care to all people as a right. And yet, within this dysfunctional health care system, we today have 40 million people who have no health insurance. We have more people who are underinsured. We have millions of people with high premiums, high deductibles. And at the end of all of that, we end up spending almost twice as much per capita on health care as do the people of any other major country on earth. The time is now for us to declare that health care is a right of all people, not a privilege. We need to pass a Medicare for all single-payer system. Point number 11, millions of senior citizens in this country live in poverty, and we have the highest rate of childhood poverty of any major country on earth. I hear a lot of discussion on the part of my Republican colleagues and some Democrats that we should be cutting Social Security. Well, I strongly disagree. In my view, we must strengthen and expand Social Security, not cut it. And that is terribly important, especially at a time when more and more seniors are slipping into poverty, and we have millions of seniors who are trying to survive on $12,000, $13,000, $14,000 a year, making decisions every single day about whether they buy the medicine they need, whether they heat their homes adequately, or they buy the food that they need. We should not be cutting these programs. We should be expanding these programs. But I think what's most important is that we try to listen to where the American people are today, to the pain of a declining middle class, to single moms desperately struggling to raise their kids with dignity, to older people trying to retire with a shred of dignity. And by the way, on that issue, let me be very clear. If there is an attempt going to be made here in the Senate to cut Social Security or to cut Medicare, you're going to have at least one senator fighting you vigorously on that. Poverty among seniors is going up. We have millions of seniors in this country who are trying to make it on $12,000, $13,000, $14,000 a year. And the last thing in the world we should be talking about is cutting Social Security. In fact, we should be talking about expanding Social Security. The 12th and last point that I would make, as part of an agenda that rebuilds America and rebuilds our middle class, is that at a time of massive wealth and income inequality, we need a progressive tax system in this country which is based on ability to pay. It is not acceptable that every single year we have major profitable corporations who pay nothing in federal income taxes. And it is not acceptable that we have corporate CEOs in this country who make millions of dollars every year, who enjoy an effective tax rate which is lower than their secretaries. That is grotesquely unfair, and it must be changed. Further, we have got to address the disgrace that every single year our country loses over $100 billion in revenue because corporations and the wealthy stash their money in offshore tax havens all over the world. The time is long overdue for real tax reform, which says to the wealthy, which says to large profitable corporations that they have got to begin paying their fair share of taxes. The struggle that we are engaged in now is stopping the billionaire class from cutting Social Security, from cutting Medicare, from cutting Medicaid, and for preventing us from creating the millions of jobs that our economy desperately needs. But at the end of the day, what we are really talking about is whether or not this nation is going to become an oligarchic form of society. And what that means, what an oligarchic form of society is about, and it has existed in many countries throughout the world, historically many countries in Latin America, although that has recently changed, is you have a nation in which both the economics and politics of the nation are controlled by a handful of billionaire families, very, very wealthy. And it doesn't matter what party is in power, because the real power, economically and politically, rests with a billionaire class. It seems to me very clearly that unless we act boldly to reverse that trend, we are seeing this country moving in exactly that direction. And one of the reasons for that is that as a result of the disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court ruling, which regards corporations as people and allows the super wealthy to spend as much as they want on elections, the billionaire party, which is obviously aligned with the Republicans, is now, in fact, the major political force in this country. It's not the Republican Party per se. It is not the Democratic Party per se. It is the billionaire party led by people like the Koch brothers and Sheldon Adelson. And they are the dominant political force in this country because they can spend unbelievable sums of money on elections. They can spend as much money as they need setting up think tanks and all kinds of organizations which will support their extreme right-wing point of view. In the last election for president, Barack Obama's campaign spent, I believe, a little bit over $1 billion. Mitt Romney, somewhere around it, maybe a little bit less. Spent about $1 billion. Koch brothers' wealth increased by $12 billion in 1 year. Is there any reason to doubt that in the future, this one family will be able to spend more money on a campaign than the presidential candidates themselves, receiving donations from hundreds of thousands of people? And that is where we are today. Where we are today is the very foundations of American democracy are being threatened by a handful of incredibly wealthy people who are saying, you know what, $80 billion is not enough for me. Yeah, I made $12 billion more last year. Not enough for me. I have to have more, and I'm going to get more tax cuts for myself. And in order to do that, we may have to cut Social Security. We may have to cut Medicare. We may have to cut Medicaid. We may have to cut education for middle-class families. But it is not only economics. Many of these billionaires are involved, as the Koch brothers are, in energy, in oil. And what they want to do is abolish agencies like the Environmental Protection Agency so they can pollute more and more and more. The scientific community tells us in an almost unanimous fashion that climate change is real, that climate change is made by human activity, that climate change is already causing severe problems in our country and around the world, and that if we don't get our act together and significantly cut greenhouse gas emissions, the problems will only become worse. And yet you have families like the Koch brothers and other energy-related billionaires spending huge sums of money trying to confuse people about the reality of climate change. The issue that we have got to focus on as American people is what kind of nation do we wish to live in? Do we want to live in a nation where a handful of billionaires own a significant amount of the wealth in this country while the middle class has less and less, where families can't afford to send their kids to college or get decent child care for their little ones, where people are reaching the age of 65 with virtually nothing in the bank in order to provide a dignified retirement? Is that the country we want to live in? or do we want to see the middle class grow and have a more equitable distribution of wealth and income? A fairer tax system where the millionaires and billionaires and large corporations start paying their fair share of taxes. And then from a political point of view, which is equally important, do we want to have a nation in which the concept is one person, one vote, that we're all equal, that you have as much say about what happens in government as anybody else? Or do we want to have a political system where a handful of billionaires can sit around the room and say, okay, put $100 million into that state. Let's put $50 million into that state, where a handful of billionaires will determine who gets elected president, who gets elected senator, who gets elected governor, and have members of Congress go crawling up to these billionaires. What do you need, Mr. Billionaire? How do I get the hundreds of millions of dollars you can give me? Is that really what American democracy is supposed to be about? It seems clear to me that the American people must demand that Congress and the White House start protecting the interests of working families and not just wealthy campaign contributors. We need federal legislation to put millions of our unemployed workers back to work, to raise wages, and make certain that all Americans have the health care and education they need for healthy and productive lives. In other words, we must have a vision for the future which talks about what this nation can become. We are in a pivotal moment in American history. The very, very rich are becoming richer. The middle class is disappearing. And today we have more people living in poverty than in almost any time in American history. And with the wealth of the billionaire class, they are exercising their power politically because Citizens United, a disastrous Supreme Court decision, has given them the power to buy elections and control, to a significant degree, our political process. And we as a nation have ultimately got to make a decision about whether or not we are going to continue that process, where the middle class continues to decline and the very, very richest people become richer, or whether we are prepared, and this is not easy stuff, to stand together to take on the billionaire class and their greed and to say enough is enough. This country does not just belong to the top 1% or the top 1/10 of 1%, but it belongs to all of us. And I hope very much that the American people make the right choice, because if they do, we can bring about a transformation of this country so the government begins to work for all of the people and not just the billionaires on top.